Hello, my name is Kelsey Siebenthaler. I'm a senior in MSTC at Paul Laurence Dunbar High School, and today I'm going to be presenting to you the research that I've been completing under the mentorship of Dr. Rachel Farr at the University of Kentucky in the Families, Adoption, and Diversity Lab. My topic of study, microaggressions experienced by diverse youth with LGBTQ plus parents. So just a quick overview of what I will be walking through today. I will start with some background about my topic, as well as the purpose and hypotheses that I have about this research, followed by methodology, the data and results, the discussion and conclusion, as well as further research opportunities, the implications of this research, and finally some acknowledgments for the people who have helped me along the way, as well as my sources, and a prompt for any questions that you may have. So just for some background, there are approximately 6 million U.S. children and adults that have at least one LGBTQ plus parent. This was as of 2015, so the number has probably only gone up since then, but they obviously make up a decent amount of our population and therefore deserve some research in this area. So if you don't know what microaggressions are subtle, often unintentional acts that marginalize a specific group based on an identity. This identity can be basically anything from racial ethnic identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic status, anything like that. For this research, it will be based on the family structure of having at least one LGBTQ plus parent. The minority stress theory is a theory that states that minorities do face stigma and discrimination and therefore have to build resilience because of those stigmas. And how they cope with those is a really interesting portion of the study as well. The multiple marginalized identity concept basically states that if a participant has multiple identities that are considered minority status, they will be marginalized in different ways because of those statuses and will face discrimination for multiple reasons. So the purpose of my research was to investigate the frequency and severity of microaggressions based on this unique family structure, as well as begin the development of a quantitative measure. So the two questions that guided this research: do youth with LGBTQ plus parents experience microaggressions based on this family structure? And do microaggression responses vary based on demographic or identity factors? So my hypotheses: yes, microaggressions based on this family structure would be experienced. That's based on previous research in which the LGBTQ plus population has experienced quite a bit of discrimination. So it seems only likely to me that children of these families, whether or not they hold the identity themselves, would also face some sort of discrimination and stigma. Additionally, participants with multiple marginalized identities, I hypothesize, would experience these items at higher frequencies just because of an overall higher rate of microaggression and discriminations for those people. So for methodology, these participants would complete a phone call interview as part of a larger qualitative study. And at the end of it, my portion of the study was 27 microaggressive items. These could range from hearing "that's so gay" in a negative way to something more personal, such as someone suggested that your family is inferior because you have an LGBTQ parent as opposed to a nuclear family. So these participants would hear these items and provide a response on a scale of 1 to 5, thinking about the past 6 months of their life, how often they have experienced these microaggressions. So these range from a 1 at not at all the way to a 5 once a day, as you can see at the diagram below. So these participants, there were 50 of them, they had to be between the ages of 12 and 25 years old, completing assent and consent forms, of course. They were recruited on UK campus and via email communication with LGBTQ plus organizations across the nation. And they all had a variety of pathways to joining their families. So this was not a requirement. They could come from any source. So a lot of them were birth and previous relationships, could be foster care adoption, donor insemination. So a lot of different experiences there. The participants ranged from a 2.5 to an 8 out of 10 on a perceived socioeconomic status scale. So participants were told to place themselves on a ladder between 1 and 10, where they think they are relative to the rest of the United States socioeconomically. So wide range there, which is really important for some people. The sample was also largely Southern and Midwestern residents. 70% of this sample is from these regions. And this was as targeted because a lot of research in this community has been pretty bi-coastal, meaning it either came from only the East Coast or only the West Coast, and it really underrepresents that geographic portion of the population. As for family structure, a variety of structures there. So they were broken into 3 categories based on just quantitative simplicity. So lesbian mothers made up almost half, 46% of the sample. Gay father family just means that they had one or more gay fathers, 20%, and other, 34%, which just means one of the parents identified with something other than simply lesbian or gay, such as asexual or bisexual or anything else like that. Additionally, there was a difference between the single parent and multiple parents family. 84% reported multiple parents, and that ranged from 2 even all the way up to more like 5 parents. Participants, as I mentioned, were between 12 and 25 years old. The average age was 19 and a half, so majority above 18, but there were 13 minors included in the study. For sexual orientation, 52% did identify as a sexual minority. And for gender identity, not super gender diverse, 82% cisgender. For race ethnicity, 60% white, 18% multiracial, 10% Latina, 10% Black, and 2% Asian, which doesn't sound a whole lot more diverse, but research in this area has also tended to be pretty whitewashed, meaning that this is actually a lot closer and more diverse than previous samples, and is representing the US population and the LGBTQ community a lot better. So for data analysis, first I completed individual item descriptive analyses, which was just the mean, the range, and the standard deviation for each individual item of the 27, and ordering them from the most frequent on average to the least frequent. Overall, across all 50 participants and all 27 items, the mean was 1.8, which means that it was between not at all and only a few times in the past 6 months, which may seem, okay, they're not happening a whole lot. But in reality, only two of the items ranged between a 1 and a 3. So all of the other items had at least one person report a 4 or a 5 on that item, which means that it's either happening every week or every day for someone in the sample. So although it may not be happening very frequently for everyone, it is still valid because it is happening for some people. And then one-way ANOVAS and independent sample t-tests were run. So one-way ANOVAS were used for variables that included more than two identities, and independent sample t-tests were used for ones that only had 2, which would obviously, I'll get into later which ones those apply to. And then I ran Pearson bivariate correlations on age and the perceived socioeconomic status. So to see as age increased or as perceived socioeconomic status increased, if there was a higher or lower frequency for these microaggressive items. There were non-significant values, way above the significant p-value. So these were found to not have a correlation. For the other 5 variables, race ethnicity was broken into, as I mentioned earlier, white, Black, Latina, multiracial, and Asian, as well as geography was broken into Northeast, South, Midwest, and West. Parent sexual identity was broken into lesbian mother, gay father, and other. And those 3 were run with ANOVAS because they had more than 2 identities for that variable. For gender identity and sexual identity, those were the independent samples t-tests, as there were only the 2 options. So gender identity was either cisgender or gender diverse, and sexual identity was only heterosexual or sexual minority. And this is due to the fact that identities tend to be very complicated, and it's a lot harder to quantify them than just to break them into simply heterosexual and sexual minority. There wasn't also a large amount representing each value, so you don't want one person to represent the whole identity. But none of these were found to have a significant p-value, so all non-significant p-values, which shows that there is not a difference between these identities within these variables. So the high scoring items for all 27 of these ranked the highest for their means. So someone expresses stereotype. You heard about people trying to deny rights for same-sex couples or LGBTQ plus people. And you saw a group either in person or in the media show negative signs. And so that last one there, just an explanation. An example would be a religious group holding up a sign that says God hates fags. So for all three of these, their averages were above a 2.5, so between a 2 and a 3, leaning towards the 3 side, which means that on average, the participants were experiencing this between a few times and about every month, which makes them a lot more frequent. But all of these did range from 1 to 5, meaning that there were participants that experienced these every day within this past 6 months. So then the low scoring items on the other side, someone assumed your parents must be depressed because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, and someone assumed your parents had HIV because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So what you'll notice about these is that these are a whole lot more aggressive. So the past slide, the high scoring items, those are considered more micro insults, meaning that it just generalizes the population or it just attacks the population as a whole. Whereas these are a lot more personal, obviously, and aggressive. So these both scored a lot lower, obviously. So the average was close to 1, meaning that majority of these participants never experienced them within the past 6 months. But both of these items also did range up to a 5. So there were participants, not a whole lot of them, but there were participants that experienced these every day. So just to discuss, based on my hypotheses, so youth with LGBTQ plus parents do experience these microaggressions, although infrequently. And these frequencies are not based on assessed identities and characteristics, but it is more of a universal experience. So other items are more frequent than others, obviously, but it's pretty universal, not based on any characteristic or geographic location or anything like that. As I mentioned earlier, micro insults are occurring at higher frequencies than the more personal and aggressive items, which would be expected. It's a lot less painful for people to attack a population rather than to say to their friends something more personal about their family. So some conclusions here, the strengths and limitations of this study. For strengths, it is a more accurate representation of the population based on geographic location, racial ethnic identity, as well as the perceived socioeconomic status. The perspective of children also, some research studies have only asked the parents how the children are doing, which is obviously a little bit biased, but also these children are in many different phases of life. So at the youngest in middle school, up to high school, college, and even some that are out of college. So a really wide amount of perspectives there. For limitations, it is a small sample because it is part of the larger qualitative-based study. And because of that, it has low-powered analyses because one person cannot represent an entire population, as I said. So obviously needs some improvement there as for sample sizes. So for further research, continuing research that represents the entirety of the population is really important. So making sure that it's not all whitewashed studies in the eastern regions and things like that of the upper class. So representing the entirety of population in research that is more accurate. Also expanding the sample size just to get more experiences to learn more about them. And even altering the time period has been suggested, so making it longer for a year or making it shorter and just saying, how about the past week? Because memory can also play a factor, but a lot of these students that could have been at college may have a very different microaggressive experience at home versus where they are now. So extending the time period would allow a more complete summary of their experiences. Also, just verifying and adjusting the scale and the individual items for accuracy and relevance. So through further sampling and more complete surveys of the whole population can learn more about how accurately this represents the population's experiences and just learn more about them. So the implications, three-pronged here. So for law and policy, understanding for workplace harassment as well as in schools, understanding at the smallest scale how words can impact the people, as well as for mental health officials that work with this unique population, understanding their experiences better and being able to work with them better, of course. And finally, the general public, just becoming more aware of the impact of the power of words and just building a conscience and knowing what not to say. So for my acknowledgements, thank you so much to my mentor, Dr. Rachel Farr, who helped me through all of this, as well as Kyle Simon, the graduate student whose project I hopped onto, and the rest of the Families Adoption Diversity Lab at UK for supporting me through this whole process, as well as UK, KYRP, MSCC, and Miss Karen Young for this opportunity to be possible and to get some amazing experience before I even start college. And of course, my friends and family, especially my MSTC seniors who have been working with me this whole time, just getting me through this process. Thank you so much. So here are my sources. And if you have any questions, please email me. Here's my email. I'll answer any questions that I can and get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for listening.